Hello, team, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan at MSP. This is Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. Where are we going to go to first? Well, a BBC article that talks about what we are so often talking about, the difficulty the Ukrainians are having in negotiating themselves through Russian defenses. Ukraine war, Western armor struggles against Russian defenses. It starts talking about General Alexander Tarnavsky saying his forces are struggling to overcome multi-layered minefields and fortified defensive lines. That is why most of the tasks had to be performed by troops. I mean, I've talked previously about how a lot of the demining activities are being carried out by troops, by individual personnel, rather than mine rollers. And we'll talk a little bit about that now in this next section or so. So the authors say, we visited the same brigade's outdoor workshop hidden in a forest behind the front line, where they are now trying to repair more than a dozen armoured vehicles, most of them US Bradleys. The first arrived unscathed, but now bear the scars of battle, broken tracks and buckled wheels, the telltale signs that several have hit Russian mines. Serhiy, one of the engineers, says, quote, the faster we can repair them, the faster we can get them back to the front line to save someone's life. But he also admits that some are beyond repair and will have to be either scavenged for spare parts or returned to our partners to be rebuilt. So some of the vehicles that have been recovered will have fundamental issues with them. I guess they'll even the Leopard tanks. They'll be repairing some of them just behind the lines in places like this that are talking about. But some of them, as we already know, will be sent back to Germany or Poland for repairs. While Western armor has provided Ukrainian troops with better protection, it has not been able to punch through the roads of Russian mines, one of the biggest barriers for Ukraine's advance. Traveling the southern front, we also saw British supplied Mastiff armored vehicles damaged and destroyed. The 47th Brigade is now using some of its older Soviet era tanks to clear minefields, but they too can't escape the explosives hidden in the ground, even when fitted with specialist mine clearing equipment. Nearer the front line, Tank Commander Maxim showed us his recently damaged T-64 tank. It's been fitted with 2 rollers on the front to deliberately set off the mines. He lost one of the rollers the night before as he was trying to clear a path for troops. Quote, normally our rollers can withstand up to 4 explosions, he says, but the Russians, he adds, have been laying mines on top of each other to destroy their mine clearing equipment. Something we've heard before, where if you stack 2, 3, 4 mines on top of each other, one triggered mine will explode them all, and that's the end of your mine roller. They are designed or built to withstand a certain number of mines going off before you have to go back to the shop. But the thing is, repair shop, that is. The thing is, when these fields are absolutely covered with mines to an extraordinary extent, then even using the correct equipment, you are going to be absolutely hammering your stuff, and you'll be cycling through that equipment really, really quickly, having to take it back to be repaired and bringing it back. And all of that takes time, effort, and you will lose equipment and you will lose troops as well. People in so doing. It's really difficult. I refer you back to that footage I showed you some weeks back of a mine roller going over an anti-tank mine and then 6 anti-personnel mines in 6 meters, like 1 a meter. Pop, 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 pop. It was just mad. And then an anti-tank mine as well thrown in for good measure. So they're mixing up those types of mines, and there's just an absolute proliferation of them right across the fields. That is. Article goes on, talks about sort of different people and their ideas of what's going on and so on and so forth, and anecdotes. But just talks to the difficulty the Ukrainians will be having, and even if what they're doing at the moment on the southern front line is something approaching a main thrust or counter offensive, either way, you're just going to lose a shed load of stuff punching through those defenses. It's just there's no way around it. You go slowly and get the correct equipment out to demine, then you're all the more vulnerable to being hit by artillery and drones. Talking about drones, this is a positive drone story. So drink water and follow the drone. There are our guys there. Our aerial reconnaissance men found wounded comrades from the 1st Tank Brigade in the Zaporizhia sector of the front. Using a drone, the soldiers dropped water and medicine to the guys and successfully brought them to our positions. So this is, pretty good stuff. I don't know what that says there, but probably what you've just been told. So attaching some bottles of water, dropping them for the guys, and then helping them out. These guys are lost in the middle of Zaporizhia fields, but possibly behind enemy lines or in the grey zone. And their fellow compatriots are furnishing them with what they need to survive. The guy here in the summer heat, possibly injured as well, gathering himself. You see that he's not in a good way, but eventually, he gets sent some medicine. I think that's medicine he gets, and then is hopefully able to return, as you see there, to back to his unit. That's drones being used for good things there. Right, I did the first part of this article with you. I shared it with you and gave you some of my opinions. This is a brilliant article in the Euromaidan press, stopping the modern Hitler. Snipers hold the line in Ukraine's battle for survival. And it centers on this one particular guy who was formerly a theologian of all professions, who's then he's obviously had some training with shooting. I don't know whether it's through hunting or through conscription or whatever, and has subsequently taken up supporting sniping units with equipment and training and whatnot, as far as I can understand it. Anyway, we joined the article sort of halfway through. We already talked about like the distances these guys can fire, the effectiveness of snipers, of snipers and of the munitions that they use and the rifles that they use. Here we join where he's talking about how crucial snipers can be for reconnaissance. They aren't just about lying in the undergrowth shooting opposition, troops, enemy troops, but they are about observation as well. They are superbly positioned to be good for that. So we have excellent optics. We have 60 times rifle scopes that help us even to see if a man has shaved or not. Also, we have good sights for the sniper rifles, and we have good optics for sniper rifles. Night Force Mark 5 Leopold, Mark Gen 3. We cannot only shoot a person 3 kilometers away, but importantly, we can do reconnaissance very effectively. During our successful counteroffensive in Kharkiv Oblast in autumn 2022, one of our sniper groups moved from Sviatohersk through the National Reserve and climbed on a cliff and saw how Russians fortified their positions around one of the villages 6 kilometers away. This was their main position near Liman and Yampil, which Ukrainian forces had to liberate. The Russians were relaxed, yet we could see everything. We could see their minefields, we could see their machine guns. The Russians thought that since there were no drones visible, nobody could see them. But the snipers did. They completely mapped the position, developed routes which Ukrainian battalion groups could use, and headed the 3 columns that unexpectedly liberated 3 villages from the Russians. Ukrainians had many losses before they came here, but they captured these 3 villages where the Russians had the main line of defense within just half an hour and with only 3 wounded. So, reconnaissance is one of the main benefits of snipers. A sniper is a commander's chief assistant. He can notice everything and suggest how to react. Sometimes our snipers even become commanders on a battlefield because they had more information than the commanders, and that's what happened in Haliapole. It gives another anecdote. So then the question is amazing. Let's say you're a sniper who wants to take out Russian commander. How do you know who is the commander in the group? So those people, says the interviewee, those people are very skillful. That's the sniper he's talking about, not the Russian commander. Some of them are officers, some of them are sergeants. And when we have a talented person with a huge experience, we give them an opportunity to create his own group. So he summons guys into his group. Only two snipers whom I started to help with by crowdfunding and supplies had their own groups. Others had to create them from scratch, and we pushed them into that direction. And we had two reasons to do that. So, one, with an experienced commander, a group of 6 to 10 people, the newcomers survive. This is very beneficial to us, as cynical as that might sound. It takes a lot of time and resources to train and prepare a sniper. Sometimes we have people who were tremendously successful at the training ground but lasted only one day at the battlefield. Russians have a strong sniper school themselves. They have developed counter sniper measures, so you have chance to be effective and survive only in a group of snipers. Experience that you can't get on a training ground is needed. So we forced those experienced snipers to create groups just to help our guys to learn and survive. Two, the effectiveness, according to statistics, shows that two young snipers can achieve tenfold more results when within a snipers group than if they were just went out on the battlefield themselves. That is impressive. That's why we pay attention to creating those sniper groups. Interestingly, so they operate in these groups, and he goes on to talk about how there's actually a US book detailing the creation of sniper groups. Um, but actually, they did it themselves, and they did what they thought was effective, and it worked. The snipers survived. They prevent the encirclement of entire battalions. I have a group of 10 snipers in the 95th Brigade who saved a battalion of 600 people from encirclement and death. This is the result of one day of their work. And this is how important these snipers can be. Not only, I mean, yesterday I talked about how they're the second highest losses for Russian troops is, or probably for both sides troops, is with snipers. In a normal non-counter-offensive active attack in certain places, 88% of casualties are from artillery, 10% from snipers, and 2% from like ordinary gunfire. So snipers are massive, and when there is a counter-offensive, snipers are still in second position. That's how we realized we had to create those groups everywhere we can. And after that, I got sent this book, which had already been written about all that. And we arrived at this through experience. It was funny. So there you go. They found the doctrinal conclusions through their own sort of suck and see approach. Most snipers with little experience were killed while they were leaving their position, goes on to say later. So this is the kind of what makes a good sniper. Um, it didn't actually go on to talk about uh, actually how to find and shoot a commander, which was actually the question. It doesn't answer that, but goes on to talk about sniper groups. But anyway, it goes on to what makes a good sniper. Most snipers with little experience were killed while they were leaving their position. So that's the importance. Is like getting into position. It's obviously dangerous because you're moving, can be seen, and leaving your position because you've done the shot or shots. They know you're there or thereabouts. You move, you can be seen, you're hit with whatever. So yeah, these components of a successful sniper are 20% shooting ability. When you and the rifle become one, when you can breathe in the right way. So that's interesting in that it's only a fifth. 20% camouflage on their positions, so learning how to conceal yourself. 20% getting to the position without being noticed, moving silently in a clandestine fashion through different landscapes, different territories. 20% leaving the position without being noticed, so the same but in reverse. And 20% recon skills, so reconnaissance skills of a sniper. So knowing what to look for, looking at. Well, we come on to this about you are tracking not just individual targets and movements, but you're kind of doing recon for a whole, maybe as he talked earlier about a whole kind of unit in position, their movements throughout the day, where they're going to be, what they're doing, so you can relay that all back to command. Snipers direct artillery fire. They coordinate artillery. Often it's more advantageous not to shoot yourself, but ask the artillery to hit the targets you have noticed. And to notice them, you need to think like a scout. This is easier for hunters than for athletes, or a person is a warrior who shoots well, and a sniper can grow from that. So there are different skill sets that are going to be utilized in different ways. But yeah, snipers who work at night come from different professional backgrounds. There are those who are journalists, social activists. They have money for semi automatic rifles, good night sights, and they shoot enemy groups every night. Most of these night snipers are girls. When it comes to long range snipers, I have only three girls, but the night snipers are mostly women, and we support them, first of all, respect their choice to go and protect their homeland. We always give them the best sights, the best rifles. These girls can always address us and we will always help them. We respect everyone, all these experienced guys, but these girls are a top priority. We can't refuse them. They are amazing, simply holy women. I suppose it takes a kind of former theologian to say something like that. Um, so these night snipers, what distance do they shoot? Well, 600 meters, but we give them equipment for shooting within 800 meters. We also have night vision for snipers that can help them reach 1 kilometer. The Ukrainian army has better equipment and night vision. The Surge Marco group has rifles that allow them to eliminate targets within 1.5 to 2 kilometer range during nighttime. It depends heavily on the scopes they use. We do all we can. Our guys can shoot at 1 kilometer at night. To raise that number to 2 kilometers, we would need to supply them with scopes that cost $17,000 instead of $4,000. But this is not justified. Every group has night vision scopes that help strike targets 1 kilometer away, or night vision add-ons. If your group doesn't have that equipment, it is simply exposed to a deadly threat that can be eliminated. We also equip the machine guns accompanying this group with night vision. They have to be ready for an unexpected night attack. These sights cost $3,700. It's not that expensive, actually, and the machine gunners can fire during the day with those night vision scopes. All our scopes work two-way like that. Sometimes we have a situation when you just can't spot a Russian amid the trees and bushes. You can see some wind blowing, but don't know if there is movement of anyone there. Then we just use thermal sights, and our group understands if there is an enemy soldier there. So using them in the daytime is obviously pretty useful too. What I'm going to do is continue with this article in the next extra, because I think there's so many interesting nuggets in here. Someone on Twitter is saying thank you for putting me onto this article. It's really, really fascinating. It is a great article. Right, this is a Chris Wiki thread. He's talking about members of the Russian Storm Z penal unit who have previously refused to fight, have reportedly been rounded up at gunpoint, their mobile phones shot to prevent them communicating with relatives, and the men taken away to the front line. A few are said to have managed to hide. The men, originally in a group of 43, first appeared on a video on the 28th of June 2023, refusing to follow terrible orders. I've shown you that video. After losing around 110 out of 150 men on the front line, they say they had no ammunition, food, or water while they were there. They subsequently posted a video around 9th of July saying they had been disarmed and dumped in an abandoned houses in the occupied village of Rozivka behind front lines. Their relatives said they were waiting to be slaughtered. Another video of that experience. Well, according to Tatiana, the wife of one of these men, they were forcibly taken away from Rozivka on the 15th of July and taken to a frontline village of Priutne in the Zaporizhia region. Their phones were taken away and shot before the men were loaded onto a truck. Of the 43 people in Rozivka, there are 12 people left, she says. Some managed to hide and others simply did not know that the army had come for them because they all lived in different houses. There is no communication at all because their phones were shot on the spot where they were taken from. The men's current whereabouts and statuses are unknown. They are said to be serving under a new commander, a tough man with a call sign Vostok, and he is unlikely to allow them to call their relatives. Tatiana herself tried to join the army to get back to her husband and was refused. She fears for their safety, saying that all their phones have been shot. Our boys will be killed soon. She says that she was warned that as soon as I started to find out anything about my husband, they would not let me near him. What's the point of going then? We don't know anymore. We are starting to go crazy. I mean, it's just the whole thing is insane, and the use of these penal units is pretty distasteful in terms of like regard for human life of their own soldiers, even though they are former convicts or convicts, if you like. I mean, it's just there's still possibly not really an excuse to just slaughter them or get them slaughtered almost willingly. It's just the complete disregard for their life is pretty shocking. Right, Pekka Kallioniemi, almost certainly a Finn there, is creator of Fatnik Soup. He says, I talk about Russian Nazis and introduce Russian neo-Nazi movements and paramilitary groups like Rusich and PMC Wagner. They're best known for being funded by the Kremlin and being responsible for the denazification in Ukraine. So this is, I think, something that we need to talk about, because so often we hear about denazification and Ukro-Nazis, and it's like, there are more overt Nazis in Russia, it appears, and amongst those who are supposedly denazifying Ukraine, than in Ukraine itself. In fact, Ukraine has a lower far right political representation. All this claim about the Nazi characteristics of Ukraine and the Azov regiment, and these they're all like Ukro-Nazis on drugs and blah blah blah. And actually, when you compare Ukraine to the EU, they're far less political representation of the far right than other nations. So it's like it's not only wrong, it's like opposite. But anyway, the thread continues. Like in many European countries, the white power skinhead movement became a notable phenomenon in the Russian far right. The movement was intensified. In addition to high unemployment rate and awful education by the First Chechen War and the imperialistic rhetoric of the Russian government, Russian officials dealt with the neo-Nazi problem between 1998 and 2000, and it was used to justify anti-extremism legislation that was later used to prosecute Russian liberals. Really interesting that. I don't know the details. They didn't give the details, but in an attempt to crack down on liberals, and we've seen that in lots of cultural wars, rhetoric and legislation in Russia, and we've seen that over the years. I've written articles on that. Uh, that actually they used legislation that was on the surface designed to crack down on the far right groups and extremist groups, and use that to attack liberals. Interesting. It was also used to launch an initiative called Managed Nationalism. Interesting. Was this kind of like nationalism is bad, like in this extreme version of it, so we need to manage it to be good nationalism that is still, so it's like, let's put these neo-Nazis to use, I guess is the approach. An attempt to mobilize neo-Nazi groups to counter and resist any anti-Putin coalitions and opposition. It's classic, right? The opposition to Putin's kind of conservative, uh, um, very traditionalist Russian nationalism. The opposition to that is like liberalism. Okay, and so it's pitting the liberals against true Russian uh, nationalism and so on and so forth. So what's the opposite of liberalism? Well, neo-Nazism. So we can use these guys to our advantage here. An attempt to mobilize neo-Nazi groups to counter and resist any anti-Putin coalitions and opposition. So this cynical yet clever initiative had Vladislav Surkov's fingerprints all over it, which is someone that he's talked about before. So this Surkov chap, some of you might not even recognize the name, but he's the main architect of both the polarizing disinformation program and the annexation system of Russia. So he's someone, he does a thread on him. But we'll continue nonetheless. So in 2005, Surkov launched a pro-Putin youth movement called Walking Together, which later collaborated with the most powerful skinhead gang, OB88. 88 is a very prevalent Nazi kind of symbol, or bit of numerology, to prevent a color revolution in Russia. Surkov turned the movement into a powerful group called Nashi. Nashi recruited underground neo-Nazi gang members, football hooligans, and other low-life scum into their ranks. The organization later separated into two neo-Nazi groups, Young Russia and Locals. That became the link between Russia's far right and the Kremlin. In 2016, which is when the Euros were in Russia, is that correct? So the World Cup was in Russia, actually. Independent, yeah. Euro 2016, Russia Insider reveals hooligans are more than ultras trained in martial arts and boxing. In other words, there's some kind of like something more organized about them, perhaps. Um, Around the same time, the Kremlin tried to fabricate a neo-Nazi Banderite problem in Ukraine with the help of Putin's friend Viktor Medvedchuk. Medvedchuk paid pro-Russian agitator Eduard Kovalenko to act as a neo-Nazi supporter of Viktor Yushchenko. Interesting. So it's again fomenting these claims of, fomenting discord in Ukraine with kind of like, yeah, would you call it not a false flag? But it's yeah, the Russians are behind it. Around 2008, Alexei Navalny tried to mobilize Democrats and radical nationalists against Putin. Putin then sent his own neo-Nazi thugs, Ruski Obraz (RO), against Navalny's thugs. RO Nazis were also responsible for the killings of journalists and human rights lawyers. Once Ruski Obraz was dissolved, its veteran members became powerful figures in Putin's regime, including Anna Trigger, who worked for Yevgeny Prigozhin's troll farm, and Andrei Gulyutin, editor of the pro-Putin nationalist blog Readers. The domestic Nazi problem. I mean, this is the whole thing about Russia's approach is always, it seems, about projection. It's like, this is what we are, so we're going to accuse you of that. Ukraine, you're all Nazis, and then when you just strip back the very veneer layers of Russian culture, you're like, oh no, actually that's you that are Nazis. It's just, but you're projecting it on everyone else. The domestic Nazi problem in Russia was extremely serious in the early 2000s, and it's worth noting that between 2000 and 2017, far-right political violence in Russia was 7 times higher than in Western Europe. Managed nationalism was just an attempt to redirect this violence. Absolutely, and it's just to think that Russia, with its communist ideals of supposedly the far left, has become this hotbed of far right Nazism when it was all about fighting. I mean, the Second World War, all the history and tradition that the Russians have about being ridding the world of Nazism and whatnot, and decades later, here we are. Just insane. Far right activists and neo Nazis often take part in military conflicts, and that was also the case with the war in Ukraine. The best known far right neo Nazi paramilitary groups in Ukraine are PMC Wagner and its subgroup Rusich Group. Both of them participate in the conflict. And this is where we see, these people, these images we've seen before, but it's Utkin, remember, as well, who is is going to come on to talk about him next. So the former was found by Yevgeny Prigozhin and neo-Nazi Dmitry Utkin, who were key players in the 2023 mutiny against Putin. Rusich is led by Alexei Milchakov, a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi who's committed numerous war crimes. So this is Dmitry Utkin, who has got the SS and Nazi tattoos on his neck and chest, and is you're basically your number 2. He's a founder member. His call sign was Wagner, I do believe. So that is hence Wagner. It's just wrapped up in this whole war, this idea, and the whole of the Kremlin power structures. The far right have just been utilized, and I showed these pictures. Was it on my video channel, or was it in one of my articles? So this is Alexei Milchakov. Anyway, Rusich's symbol is a Sonnenrad, an ancient European symbol hijacked by neo-Nazis and other far-right groups. You might have seen the symbol in fan-made promotional video for DeSantis' presidency, the one that was also shared by his campaign staffer. Oops, that's a bit of a mistake there. Rusich has expressed genocidal intentions towards Ukrainians by discussing on how to solve the Ukrainian question, how to exterminate Ukrainian children with scientific experiments, and how to force Ukrainian women serve as concubines to Russian men. Holy cow. They even called for Russian soldiers to be given 2 to 3 girls aged 10 or below as sexual slaves. They've also stated that Ukrainian women dream about being raped by Russian soldiers and that raping them is an act of charity. Another prominent but not so well known Russian ultra nationalist organization is the Russian Imperial Movement, RIM. The group promotes political orthodoxy and are in a symbiotic state with the Kremlin. As long as they don't commit domestic terrorism, they're free to offer troops and train militants abroad. RIM has been connected to Russian intelligence and they've provided paramilitary training to extreme far right militias in at least in the US, Poland, Finland, Germany, and Sweden. Just goodness, that's Washington's defunct Atomwaffen division has deep ties to the terrorist organization Russia Imperialist Movement. German neo-Nazis trained in Russia. These are just newspaper headlines or stories. Wednesday's papers, neo-Nazi training, employment discrimination, fighting swans. So that's Finland. Yeah. Of course, there are other smaller Russian neo-Nazi groups fighting in Ukraine too. Some of these include the Russian Orthodox Army, Slavic Union, Black Hundreds, Dugin's Eurasian Youth Union, and Somalian Sparta battalions. Many of these groups have been involved in some form of the Russo-Ukrainian war since 2014, and many of them were integrated into the pro-Russian separatists in Donbass. My goodness, it's just, yeah, it's threaded right throughout the DNA of this war, isn't it? Many neo-Nazis consider military conflict a tempting possibility. Some of them are drawn to violence, but many young, untrained volunteers also consider it a rite of passage on a battlefield. More experienced fighters who are often unable to return to civil life join the ranks as mercenaries to earn a living. Russia also utilizes the prison population by recruiting murderers and rapists and to fight in some of their PMCs like Wagner. The Kremlin uses Nazism, far-right militias, and Nazi propaganda in extremely cynical ways, including one, using it domestically to control and attack the opposition. They have no problem with dealing with neo-Nazis when they can be used as a tool in domestic politics. Two, training foreign fringe militias and extremist groups that can then incite violence and unrest. That's abroad and in places where it's beneficial for them to do so. Three, blaming others for Nazism and using it as a casus belli. This is what they did in Ukraine. So in other words, like, fomenting discord by having these so-called Nazis operating in Ukraine, but actually, it's Russia that is either putting those people in there directly or supporting that, financially or in many other insidious ways. Funding of far right groups and politicians in Europe and this is a growing problem. So the rise of the far right in Europe that has connections to the Kremlin. So we know if we look at what was the Front National, what they're called now, the French far right with Marine Le Pen. Now, although there might be genuine like issues for some people in France and a lack of social cohesion, all sorts of issues that will send people to these polarized positions and genuine political issues that might be taking place. You also have Marine Le Pen getting funded by, I mean, before the last elections, there were the connections made with bank loans basically coming from Russia. The far right in France is being quite overtly funded by Russia, and that connection is there. The Russians are supporting these kind of movements right throughout Europe, and some of these movements are really formal political movements. Yeah, so funding of far right politics and politicians in Europe, and number five, using Nazism as a domestic propaganda tool. Putin still promotes USSR Russia as a savior against evil Nazism. Just like it's incredible, isn't it? Talking out both sides of his mouth. To conclude, the only country in need of denazification is, drumroll please, Russia. So after all that, there you go. It has some problems there. and they need to be resolved. Um, and final piece I'm going to talk to you about is an article about veterans, British and possibly American veterans, helping drive Russians out of Dnipro Delta. This is in the Times, usually behind a paywall. Um, but here we have an interesting little piece. So here, let's join it. 10 strong, somewhere down. The 10 strong team, comprising veterans of British, American, and Australian forces and idealists who fought ISIS in Syria, are now regulars in the Ukrainian armed forces. During more than 8 weeks of intense fighting, they have helped Ukraine to drive the Russians from the Dnipro Delta Islands and set up a bridgehead on the occupied side of the river, opening up a new avenue of attack for the summer counteroffensive. Speaking to the Times, they revealed details of the operation now in its final mopping up phase for the first time. So that's interesting, giving you an indication that there could really be actually a counteroffensive taking place across a Dnipro River, and it's in the final stages of preparation. Suicide drones and US supplied fast boats and heavy weapons have given Ukrainian special forces an edge here, particularly after floods caused by the destruction of the dam swept away enemy positions, killing Russian troops who were not informed about the plan to blow it up. Quote, over the past few months, the army has taken a lot of the islands and we've secured a really solid foundation across the Dnipro, said Harry Rowe, 36, a British veteran of fighting ISIS in Syria under the pseudonym Mesa Gifford. He's been interviewed a bunch of times. I've seen him interviewed. We've killed a lot more of them than they have of us and taken out their artillery. British intelligence last week noted an increase in fighting around the lower reaches of the Dnipro River, as well as intense combat on contested islands and a small Ukrainian bridgehead near the ruined Antonivsky Bridge. The Witcher team were more bullish. Quote, at this moment, it looks like the Russians have given up on the islands we're operating on and a lockdown on the Yeleshki side, said Damian Rodriguez, 42, the team's American commander. I think we'll go for one of the towns around the area to get a full foothold. I hate these swamps. We've got to get onto dry land. Um, so it goes on to say the islands are only accessible by boat across a wide stretch of water, and it's exposed to Russian artillery, and they're difficult to supply and equip. So both sides have sent rotating patrols with provisions for a week into the archipelago in an effort to secure them and maintain a permanent presence. For the Russians, that means having to divert elite troops away from Ukraine's push south from Zaporizhia and east towards Bakhmut. The team sniper, Tony, 51, talking about snipers, formerly of the 1st Battalion of Royal Anglian Regiment, who asked us not to use his last name, said, quote, they've got to keep their good fighting units down here because if they leave some bog-trotting conscript unit, they know we're going to pop up and say, hello, we're coming through, and we will. Tony and Rowe both came to Ukraine as volunteers to provide training and humanitarian aid, but were motivated to fight by the massacres at Bucha and other cities that had been occupied by the Russians. And then it goes on to talk about a particular anecdote of a fight and not wanting to be captured. And the article ends with, for the rest of the team, that would be a fate worse than death being captured. Many of them fought in Syria alongside fellow Brits Sean Pinner and Aidan Aslin and saw how they were captured by the Russians while defending Mariupol, tortured and used as propaganda tools, yet they have made peace with the risks they face if caught fighting for a cause in a foreign land. Tony said, yeah, it's going to be nasty, but I don't think about it. I just want to be focused and do the job. You've just got to look at what the Russians are doing and have the stones to say, that's wrong, and I'm going to do something about it. Absolutely brilliant, and hats off to all those people in Ukraine who are fighting. You know, obviously hats off to all the Ukrainian fighters, but those who have gone over to lay their lives down potentially for what they believe is the good and right thing to do, and for freedom and for all these ideals. Hence, they talk about them being idealists, and you know, I'm there with them in mind, if not in body and geographical position. Truly brave people, though, those guys truly are. Right. Last thing I want to say is I'm going to refer you to Lionhearted Fella, who is someone who watches the channel, a NAFO member who works hard, it appears, to support Ukraine and Ukrainian efforts. He's pointing me towards United Resource for Ukrainians in Australia. I know I have lots of Australian viewers, or a number of you and members. Really appreciate you guys. This is it looks like a really good resource, as well as a really good way of supporting Ukraine. They have, ways of supporting. They have suggestions of how you can support, in not just in donating financially, but attending events, writing letters, all that kind of stuff. If you're Australian, please check this out. I'm going to put this in the description below. And if you want to donate to what they're doing, be really, really appreciated. They have many ways to donate here and many affiliations they have, but please check out this website for them. It's really good. There's kind of work that all these NAFO groups do, and all these different groups. So this isn't necessarily NAFO per se. This is Ukrainians. United Resource for Ukrainians in Australia. So this is about Ukrainians in Australia and supporting them, and also allowing them to do kind of lobbying work for politicians, and also just drumming up cultural support and popular support for the Ukrainian cause. Spread the word, throw it around social media, and if I can do my little bit to get the work of people like Lionhearted Fella thrown out there, and to support their cause, then I'll do that. So thanks for bringing this to my attention, fella. Appreciated. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for your support. I really, really appreciate it. I will speak to you tomorrow. So much more content. I've even got excerpts of stuff I didn't get round to adding to the video yesterday to share, but it will all come out eventually. Thanks again. Take care. Speak soon.